The eviction notice hit the counter at 9:04 in the morning. Celeste Monroe did not flinch. She had been opening this bookstore since she was 9 years old, dragging a step stool to reach the register while her grandmother hummed gospel into the shelves. She had survived 3 rent hikes, 1 flood, a pandemic, and a neighbor who played reggaeton until 2 a.m. She was not going to be finished by a piece of paper. She picked it up, read it twice, set it down like it was someone else's problem. Then the door opened. He walked in like the room owed him rent. Black coat, still expression, the kind of silence that arrives before a verdict. He looked at the bookstore the way people look at things they have already decided to take. "Miss Monroe," he said, "I am Yoon Tae-sok. I believe we have something to discuss." Celeste folded her arms. "The store opens at 9. You can browse or you can leave." He did not leave. Neither did she. And that was where it started, not with a threat, but with 2 people who refused to move first. If this story already has you, hit subscribe and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The offer came in a cream envelope with no return address and perfect penmanship, slid across the counter like a card in a card game Celeste had not agreed to play. She did not open it immediately. She set it beside the register, sold 3 paperbacks and a poetry collection, made change for a teenager who could not stop staring at his phone, and then, only then, opened it. She read it once, folded it, put it in the drawer under the broken stapler. Then she called Gabriel. "I'll look into it," he said, warm and certain the way Gabriel always was. "Don't sign anything, don't engage. I'll handle it." She felt better after that. She should not have. Yoon Tae-sok arrived the next morning at 5 minutes past 9. He was not what she expected, which she resented immediately. She had prepared for loud, some developer with a hard handshake and a percentage point smile. Instead, she got stillness, a dark coat, buttoned to the collar, a face that gave nothing away. He looked at the bookstore the way a man looks at something he has already made a decision about, and Celeste felt that look like a hand on her shoulder she had not consented to. "Miss Monroe," he said, "good morning." He made it sound like an opening statement. "We're open. That means you can browse or you can leave. It doesn't mean I want to talk about your offer." "I understand." He did not move. "I'd like to make my position clear in person, if you'll allow it." "I won't." A pause. He nodded, once, like she had said something reasonable. Then he walked to the poetry aisle, selected a book, and sat in the reading chair her grandmother had reupholstered twice, and read. He stayed for 40 minutes. He bought the book. He said, "Thank you, Miss Monroe," and again it sounded like a closing argument. He came back the next day, and the day after that. He never pushed. He never mentioned the offer again. He simply arrived, found something to read, sat in that chair like he had been assigned to it, and left with the quiet courtesy of a man who had nowhere better to be and knew it. Celeste found this far more unsettling than a threat. A threat she could fight. A man sitting peacefully in her grandmother's chair, working his way through the Korean poetry section, that she did not have a word for. She called Gabriel again on the 4th day. "He keeps coming in," she said. "Let him," Gabriel said. "It's a public bookstore. He's not doing anything wrong. I've got people looking into the property filings. Just give me a few more days." "Right," Celeste said. She watched Tae-sok turn a page. He did not look up. She went back to work. He checked out When the Rain Finds You on a Thursday. Celeste noticed because he stood at the counter for a full 30 seconds reading the back cover with the focused expression of a man reviewing a contract. He asked if it was representative of the genre. She said it was fine. He nodded like fine was a data point he could use and left with it tucked under his arm like a case file. She forgot about it by Friday. He returned it on Monday with a folded document inside the front cover. Celeste found it when she was reshelving. 4 pages, printed. His name at the top, the novel's title beneath it, and then, organized under clean headings, his observations. She stood in the aisle and read the whole thing. There was a section on pacing, which was fair. There was a section on secondary characters, which was actually insightful, and she hated that. There was a section called Symbolic Repetition that cited page numbers. And then, at the bottom of page 2, a heading that made her close her eyes briefly before continuing. Narrative Inefficiencies. He had listed 7 of them. She brought the document to the counter, waited until he settled into his usual chair, and walked over with it held between 2 fingers like evidence. "You submitted notes," she said. He looked up. "I had observations. About a romance novel." "About the structure," he said. "The romance I found adequate." Celeste pulled the other chair over and sat down, which surprised them both. Section 4, Narrative Inefficiencies, number 3. The protagonist's central conflict could be resolved in Chapter 6 if either character simply spoke plainly. She looked at him. "That's the whole genre. That's not inefficiency, that's the engine. It seems like an avoidable delay. It's not a delay, it's a story." She set the pages on her knee. "If they talked plainly in Chapter 6, there's no book." He considered this. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past. Someone's dog barked twice and stopped. "Why does love always require suffering first?" he said. It was not quite a question. "It doesn't require it, it just usually comes with it." She looked at him properly for the first time, not like a problem to be managed, but like a person sitting in front of her. "You don't think it's worth it?" "I think most people in these books spend a long time being afraid of something that was already theirs." The store was quiet. Celeste looked down at the document. She thought about several sharp things she could say, and said none of them. "That's actually the point," she said finally. "That's what the whole book is about." He nodded slowly, like he was filing that somewhere. "I may have missed that," he said. "You did," she said. But her voice had lost its edge, and they both noticed. She had not invited him. She wanted that on record, at least in her own mind. She had said, on Tuesday, in the middle of an argument about unreliable narrators, "Some of us have actual reading to do. The book club meets Friday." And it had been a dismissal, not an invitation. The distinction felt important. He arrived at 6:58 with a printed agenda and a box of very expensive shortbread. The regulars were already arranged in the circle of mismatched chairs Celeste had been setting up since she was 12. Mrs. Adeyemi, who had opinions about everything and delivered them like weather. Patricia and June, who had been best friends for 40 years and argued like it. 2 teenagers, Dara and Marcus, who came for the snacks and stayed because nobody talked down to them here. And now, Yoon Tae-sok, standing at the edge of the circle, holding his agenda, waiting to be told where to sit. Mrs. Adeyemi pointed at the chair beside her. "You, sit." He sat. Celeste watched him place the agenda on his knee, exactly parallel to his leg, and thought, this is going to be a disaster. It was not a disaster. He had read the book, actually read it, not skimmed it, and his first comment was about the lighthouse as a symbol of inherited expectation, which made Patricia put down her tea and say, "Finally, someone who gets it," which she had never once said about anything Celeste offered. He had cross-referenced a secondary theme with something from the author's previous novel. He asked Marcus what he thought about the ending before giving his own opinion, and Marcus, who trusted approximately no adults, answered him. The shortbread was excellent. Celeste sat in her grandmother's chair and watched the whole thing happen with the quiet bewilderment of someone watching rain fall upward. What undid her, quietly, privately, was not the agenda or the symbolism, or even the shortbread. It was the moment Mrs. Adeyemi laughed at something he said and patted his hand, and Tay-Sok went completely still. Not stiff, still. The way a person goes still when something catches them off guard, and they are trying very hard not to show it. He looked down at Mrs. Adeyemi's hand on his, and then back up, and there was something in his face that was there and gone in less than a second, some brief, unguarded thing that Celeste had no name for and felt she had not been meant to see. He did not move for the rest of the evening. He laughed when the group laughed, and answered when he was asked, and sat with his agenda folded on his knee, untouched after the first 10 minutes, like a man who had prepared for one thing and found something else entirely. After everyone left, Celeste stacked chairs and said nothing. Tay-Sok helped without being asked. That was almost worse. She said it on a Tuesday, without planning to. He had been in the store for 40 minutes, working through a collection of modern Korean poetry she was fairly certain he had already finished twice, and she had been watching him from behind the register with the specific irritation of someone who cannot find anything technically wrong with what they are looking at. "Why do you keep coming here?" she said. Not a question, exactly. More like thinking out loud with an audience. He looked up. "I enjoy the selection." "You've read the selection." "I'm rereading it." Celeste set down the invoice she was not processing anyway and walked to the aisle. She stood at the end of it with her arms folded and looked at him directly, the way she had been avoiding doing for 2 weeks. "What do you actually want?" she said. "Not the offer, not the building. You. What is it you're actually looking for when you come in here and sit in that chair?" He considered the question with the same seriousness he brought to everything, which was its own kind of infuriating. "I'm not certain yet," he said. "That's not an answer. It's the accurate one." Celeste looked at him, the coat, the stillness, the complete absence of any readable expression, and said, before she could stop herself, "You have the personality of an expensive umbrella." A pause. "I'm not sure what that means," he said. "It means you're technically useful, aesthetically unnecessary, and you show up in every storm without ever explaining yourself." She held his gaze. "Nobody knows why you're there. You're just there." He was quiet for a moment. Something moved at the edge of his expression, small and brief, like a light in a window at a distance. "That," he said, "is the most accurate thing anyone has ever said to me." She had prepared for deflection, defensiveness, another layer of composure she would have to find a way through. She had not prepared for that, for him to receive it like something he had been waiting to hear. "I didn't mean it as a compliment," she said. "I know," he said. He looked back at the book. "It wasn't one. That's why it was accurate." Celeste stood in the aisle for a moment longer, all her momentum spent, nothing sharp left to reach for. She went back to the counter. She picked up the invoice. She did not process it. Behind her, she heard him turn a page. The afternoon settled around them the way it always did, quietly, unhurried, like the store itself had decided this was simply how things were now. 2 people in the same space, not talking, not leaving. She thought about the expensive umbrella. She thought he probably knew exactly why he kept coming back. She was beginning to suspect she did too. She almost missed it. She was doing the thing she did on slow afternoons, moving through the shelves with no particular purpose, straightening spines, checking for books shelved backwards, when she saw him. He was in his usual chair, which she had quietly stopped thinking of as her grandmother's chair and started thinking of as his, which she had not given herself permission to examine. He was reading, which was not unusual, but the book in his hands was. She knew that cover without seeing the title. Celeste crossed the aisle in 4 steps. "Where did you find that?" He looked up, unhurried as always. The bottom shelf. It had fallen behind the others. She reached for it, and he handed it over without hesitation, which was the only reason she did not say something sharp. She turned to the first page. Her grandmother's handwriting filled the margins. Small, looping, unhurried script, the kind that took its time because it had no reason to rush. Notes on certain lines, small arguments with the poet. One passage circled 3 times with nothing written beside it, as if she had returned to it until the meaning changed. Celeste stood very still. "She marked it up," Taesak said quietly. "She marked everything up." Celeste's voice came out steadier than she expected. "She said a book you don't argue with is a book you don't trust." He was quiet for a moment. "She sounds like someone who had decided what she believed." She had. Celeste turned another page. She also changed her mind constantly. She just changed it loudly. She almost smiled. She opened this store when she was 31 with 2 boxes of books and a card table for the register. 40 years later, she still came in every morning like it might surprise her. She stopped herself there, as if she had only meant to give him a sentence and found a whole paragraph already out. Taesak said nothing. He was watching her in the way he sometimes did, not studying, not calculating, just present, like listening with something he was doing with his whole body. "Celeste would have talked to you," Celeste said, before she could decide not to. "She talked to everyone. That was her. She never met a person she couldn't find something in." She looked at the circled passage. "I didn't inherit that." "You inherited the store," Taesak said. "That's not the same thing." "No," he agreed, "but you're still here." The afternoon light came through the window at a low angle, catching the dust between the shelves, making everything slow and amber and quiet. Taesak opened his mouth. Something moved across his face. She had learned by now to watch for those, and then it closed again. He looked at the shelf instead. Whatever it was, he put it back. But the silence between them had changed shape, and they both felt it, and neither of them moved to fill it. Gabriel Frost had a gift for arriving at exactly the right moment, which Celeste had always taken as evidence of loyalty. It would be some time before she understood it as evidence of something else entirely. He came in on a Wednesday morning with a leather portfolio, a coffee for her, oat milk, no sugar, remembered without asking, and the particular smile he wore when he had already solved a problem and was enjoying the moment before he revealed it. "Sit down," he said. "It's my store," she said, but she sat. He laid it out cleanly. An investor group, 3 parties, all with neighborhood development portfolios and clean records. They were interested in a protective acquisition, buying the building's debt position before anyone else could, stabilizing the lease terms for 10 years, giving Celeste full operational control. The paperwork was already drafted. He had spent 3 weeks pulling it together quietly, he said, because he hadn't wanted to get her hopes up until he was certain. He slid the portfolio across the counter. "This is real," he said. "This is done if you want it." Celeste looked at the documents. They were thorough, the kind of thorough that takes time, that suggests someone who knows what they are doing has been doing it carefully and for a while. She felt something loosen in her chest that she had not realized was clenched. "Gabriel," she said. "You don't have to thank me." He said it easily, like a man who already knew he would be thanked. She looked up and caught, over Gabriel's shoulder, Taesak in the poetry aisle. He was not reading. He was watching Gabriel with an expression she had not seen him before. Not hostile, not cold, but concentrated. The way a person looks when they are trying to place something they almost recognize. He did not look at Celeste. He looked at Gabriel like a question he was working backwards from. Then Gabriel shifted, blocking her sightline, and said something else about timelines, and Celeste brought herself back. She called Taysoc's visits unnecessary that afternoon, out loud to no one in particular. She told herself the situation was handled. She left Gabriel's portfolio open on the counter where she could see it. Taysoc came to the register before he left. He bought nothing. He stood for a moment with his hands in his coat pockets and said carefully, "The investor group, do you know who they are individually?" "Gabriel vetted them," she said. He nodded once. Not agreement, acknowledgement. There was something behind it that he was choosing not to say, and she was too relieved to ask him to say it. "Good night, Miss Monroe," he said. He left. She watched him go and felt, beneath all the relief, something small and persistent she could not name, like a book shelved in the wrong section, almost right, not quite. Taysoc did not come in on Thursday. Celeste noticed, which irritated her. She had grown used to the quiet shape of him in the poetry aisle, the shortbread he sometimes brought without announcing it, the way the store felt slightly more occupied when he was there. She noticed his absence the way you notice a sound stopping, not loudly, but completely. He came in Friday morning before she had turned the sign. He knocked. She let him in. He stood on the customer side of the counter and placed a folder in front of her without preamble. Thin, tabbed, the contents already organized because, of course, they were. He said, "I need you to read this. All of it, before you say anything." She read it. It took 11 minutes. She knew, because she watched the clock without meaning to, the way you track small certain things when larger things are coming apart. The investor group had a parent company. The parent company had a registered agent. The registered agent appeared 2 layers removed in the incorporation documents of the same property management firm that had been filing pressure notices against her building for the past 4 months. Gabriel's name was not on the surface of any of it. He was careful, had always been careful, but Taysoc had found the thread and followed it all the way back, and at the end of it was a man with a leather portfolio and a remembered coffee order and 3 weeks of quiet work he had framed as loyalty. Celeste closed the folder. She did not say anything for a long time. The thing about a betrayal from someone loud and careless is that it lands like a storm, sudden, violent, and eventually over. The thing about a betrayal from someone who was kind to you deliberately, strategically over years is that it does not land like a storm. It lands like a floor giving way. Every memory re-examines itself on the way down. She thought about every call, every piece of advice, every moment she had trusted his read of a situation over her own instincts. She thought about how close she had come to signing those documents and handing him the one thing her grandmother had built and she had bled to keep. She set her hands flat on the counter. Taysoc was watching her the way he always watched her, steadily, without filling the silence with things it didn't need. He said, "I'm not going to ask if you're all right." She said, "Good." He said, "What do you want to do?" She looked at the folder. She thought about her grandmother's handwriting in the margins of a poetry book, small, certain, not afraid to argue. She thought about 40 years of a woman who built something and never once waited for someone else to protect it. She said, "I want to finish this." He nodded. "Then tell me where to start," he said, and stepped back and waited for her to lead. They were in the store after closing, the confrontation with Gabriel still an hour ahead of them, when Taysoc stopped at the door instead of opening it. Celeste looked up from her coat. "What?" He turned. He had the expression he got sometimes, The one she had learned meant something real was trying to find its way out through a man who had very few practice runs at letting things out. "I need to tell you something," he said, "before we do this, not after." She set her coat down. He did not move from the door. He spoke the way he did everything, precisely, without decoration, each word placed where it was meant to go. But underneath the precision was something she had not heard from him before, something that cost him. His mother had come to America in the early 90s, he said. She spoke almost no English. She had savings that disappeared faster than anyone told her they would, and a son she was trying to raise in a city that had not made room for her, and a specific kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people and understood by none of them. One winter, he was 7, he remembered because of the coat he was wearing, too thin for the cold, she had become lost on foot, in a neighborhood she did not know, in weather she was not dressed for. She had gone into the nearest open door. It was a bookstore. The woman inside had not asked her to explain herself, or justify her presence, or perform gratitude for being allowed to warm up. She had made tea. She had sat with her for 2 hours, communicating mostly in gestures and patience and the occasional piece of paper with a hand-drawn map. She had sent them home with a bag of books and refused money for any of it. His mother had talked about that woman for the rest of her life. It had taken him years to find the store, more years to find a way to do something with what he found. The only language he had, the only one his life had taught him, was acquisition, legal structure, protective ownership. He had not known how to simply arrive and say, "Someone who loved you once did something that mattered." He had not known if that was even allowed. "I never wanted to take anything," he said. "I wanted to make sure no one else could." The store was very quiet. Celeste stood on her side of it and looked at him for a long time, at this man who had shown up in an expensive coat with a formal offer and an agenda for book club and 4 pages of notes on a romance novel, who had sat in her grandmother's chair like he was trying to understand something he could not name. "She would have told you that all you had to do was say thank you." Something in his face settled. Not relief exactly, something older than relief. "I know that now," he said quietly. She picked up her coat. "Come on, let's go end this." Gabriel did not see it coming, which was the thing about people who spent too long being the smartest person in a room they had carefully arranged. Celeste laid it out in front of him at the community meeting he himself had called, his forum, his audience, his carefully managed narrative, and she did it without raising her voice once. The documentation was clean, the paper trail was complete. Tayasak had been thorough in the way that only a man who had spent his life operating in the spaces between legal and illegal could be thorough. He knew exactly where to look because he knew exactly where things got hidden. Gabriel tried 3 different exits from the conversation. Celeste had anticipated all of them. The room, which had gathered expecting to hear about a rescue, heard instead about a long and deliberate betrayal, and then the room made its own decision. Gabriel left. He did not perform his way out. What happened after was quieter than Celeste expected and larger. Mrs. Adiemi knew a lawyer. The lawyer knew a city councilwoman who had been looking for exactly this kind of documented fraud case for 2 years. The teenagers, Dara and Marcus, made something on their phones that spread faster than Celeste could track. 3 neighboring businesses wrote letters. A woman Celeste had never met sent a check with a note that said only, "I bought my first novel here in 1987. Please keep going." The property pressure dissolved. The building's ownership transferred cleanly. Tayasak handled the mechanics without fanfare, which was the only way he knew how to be generous. The renovation took 4 months. Celeste made every decision about the bookstore itself. The shelves stayed, the reading chairs stayed, the slight lean of the poetry aisle that nobody had ever fixed stayed. What was added grew around what already existed rather than replacing it. A cafe counter along the east wall, warm and unhurried, run by Patricia's niece, who made coffee like it was a form of care. A community reading room in the back, with a long table and mismatched chairs, and walls lined with the neighborhood's donated books. A small archive in the corner, properly housed, properly labeled, containing 40 years of her grandmother's handwriting. The book club tripled in size. People brought their friends. The teenagers started a second group that met on Sundays and was technically about graphic novels and was actually about everything. On the first Saturday of every month, a section of the floor was cleared and small chairs were arranged in a circle. Children arrived with their parents and shed their coats and sat. Teosak came in through the back. He took off his coat, folded it, and sat in the smallest chair with the straightness of a man still not entirely sure he was doing it correctly. He opened the book. The children leaned in. He read slowly, with great seriousness, doing every voice. Nobody who saw it ever forgot it. Nobody told him that. They didn't need to. He already knew. Because for the first time in longer than he could name, he was exactly where he meant to be. There is a particular kind of place that holds people without meaning to, where something in the air or the light or the arrangement of things says, "You can put it down here, whatever you have been carrying." Celeste's grandmother understood that a bookstore was never really about books. It was about the person who needed one on the wrong day and found exactly the right one. It was about the door that stayed open. Celeste had to lose nearly everything to relearn what her grandmother already knew, that home is not a thing you preserve behind glass. It is a thing you keep building, with whoever shows up and stays. Teosak showed up badly, in a coat that cost too much, with paperwork instead of words, and a formal offer instead of a simple truth. But underneath all of it was a debt of gratitude he had carried since he was 7 years old, looking for a shape it could finally take. It took 2 people willing to stop performing their armor long enough to see each other clearly. The bookstore did not just survive, it became something neither of them could have built alone. That is the story. If it left a mark on you, you already know what to do. Hit subscribe, stay with this community, and tell me in the comments which character felt most real to you and why. I read every single one. Silent Speaks Stories, where every story leaves a mark.